Get underway. Thanks, Rob. Good morning and welcome to Economic Development. We had a technicality difficulty this morning, so we've got no thunderstruck like usual, but not to worry. Are there any apologies?
Chair, I have partial apology for the meeting. I need to leave at midday for up to 90 minutes, but I suspect that will coincide with part of lunch anyway. But I intend to be back after my midday meeting.
Okay, 12 o'clock you're heading away?
12 o'clock, yeah.
Okay.
I've got a meeting in Rototuna, a council-related meeting at 3 o'clock, but I reckon we should probably be well done by half 12 probably.
Yeah. Okay, thanks Jeff. Also noting Mangai Thompson Evans and Mangai Teua away for a full apology. And Mayor Paula was here, but I guess she's just out for a moment. Okay, I'll move that the apologies be accepted. Seconded by Deputy Chair Ewan. Confirmation of agenda, page 5 and diligent. I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Ewan. Any debate? None. Declarations of interest? None. Public forum, just noting a letter from Roger Stratford. No comment. Item 5, confirmation of the Open Economic Development Committee meetings, 9th of March. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Ewan. Any debate? None. Carried unanimously. Chair's report, page 18, I'll take as read. Right.
At least it isn't one of those old chairs that used to flip you right back.
In terms of Chair's report, just obviously some updates from the budget and just some commentary. Don't particularly want to talk about it too much. Are there any questions? I'll move, seconded by Deputy Mayor Ewan. Any debate? None.
I've just had a promotion.
Sorry. Prophetic. Fantastic. That brings us to item 7, Te Waka. Welcome, Hamish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's nice to see there's a few familiar faces that I've spoken to off and on over the last 6 months, and I haven't prepared a written report for the committee today. I thought I'd talk to a couple of key things and really just open it up to questions and answers. I think from a Te Waka point of view, it's been a real journey for us all. The last 6 months have seen us focusing very much on the strategic plan we launched in September last year, which is centred around 4 key PO. The first being sector and industry work, the second being Māori economic development, the third effectively focusing on regional engagement, so broader engagement work with constituent stakeholders both in local government and also with businesses around the region, and the fourth one being the area that we're looking to move more into, which is the investment facilitation work. So there's been a team in place focusing on that. We've got some team vacancies at the moment, so there's some of that work is being managed in the interim as we look to recruit new people. But in the sector and industry work, strong progress in logistics and distribution. We've brought together the key players across that industry, from freight owners to people that are working. We're commissioning some work that will enable us to lobby for particularly rail support into Wellington, and so some strong work in that sector. We've been partnering with HCC around the innovation and technology work stream. We're making some good progress in that area. That's working very much with industry and others. International education and education has been quite a strong focus, and also then construction, and having brought together most of the major construction vertical horizontal people and working on a very focused industries plan. So very specific work for us in the sector work, and the key there is in partnership with industry. It's bringing industry together to understand issues and opportunities and to have focused plans on the way we move forward. On the Māori side, we've signed now joint ventures with Waka Tainui. We're looking at extending that with other iwi and hapa across the region, which are going to specific work programs, and we've launched a social procurement plan to move us forward in partnership with Amatai in that area. Regional engagement, we've had significant and strong work led by Amanda Hemmer, getting amongst our constituents, stakeholders in the regions, both government, local government and business, and that's helping us evolve at the moment a list of very strong regional economic priorities which we're putting together, which we'll be working with the PDO on as we move into the new, I guess, another new era of how government will engage with us. And I guess the final one is the investment work, where we've been trying to start the bones of an investment ecosystem, which is a moving focus for us going forward. So look, I guess in terms of work streams, that's where the focus has been. We've lost 2 out of our 4 key staff in the last 3 months, so we're really working now to bring those new people back into the business in an environment where the big challenge for us is overarching funding. So very grateful that we're getting strong support out of the 10 councils in terms of renewing our $370,000 for funding across for the next 3 years. The Regional Council has now approved, subject to final stages, funding increase from 300 to 750, which is fantastic. So that takes our baseline funding to about 1.1, which is fantastic actually in terms of seeing that support. The brutal reality is that level of funding doesn't enable us to deliver the full work plan and still leaves us significantly underfunded when it comes to comparators to other economic development agencies. And we've made an approach through to central government to see if we can solicit further support, both direct from government and through the PDU, to enable us to extend that work plan. Messaging back from Wellington in the last 24 hours isn't hugely encouraging on that front, but we'll continue to work actively with the local PDU staff who have been very supportive around how we support that work plan going forward. The reality of that will be over the next few weeks from a Te Waka point of view. We'll be looking at the nature of our work plan and what we can and can't do with the funding that's in place, and having some very honest conversations with stakeholders around what it is we can afford to do with our funding and what we cannot. But that'll be a high integrity discussion. But again, focused plan executing on that. Key staff under recruitment. We've put on hold the recruitment of the chief executive just for a few weeks until we lock down our funding. From an integrity point of view, I don't want to be in the market while there's uncertainty, but we'll move forward on that as soon as we've got some certainty over the next few weeks in terms of where we're going in terms of direction. So, Mr Chair, that's probably a brief summary. I guess I'm very happy to take more specific questions.
Thanks, Hamish. Just before we go to questions, I'm just going to ask Blair, do you want to comment on staff recommendation or the work programme?
I might actually just invite Mike just to come up and give a quick comment on the recommendation and the report. Thanks, Mike.
Morning, thank you. Together with the 6 monthly, we've put a recommendation to the committee that they recommend to the council to provide delegation back to the committee, to the council to work with you, Ryan, as well as Blair and you on the service level agreement and the partnership agreement that Te Waka are currently working on ahead of their 16 June meeting. This effectively gives you the ability to work with them on that agreement. The service level agreement and the partnership agreement basically lay forth the terms of Te Waka and not just HCC but the other funding councils over the next 3-year period, as well as a more direct annual sort of HCC Te Waka agreement on how we'll work together and what we'll prioritize. The goal is to have both of those finalized and approved in June. And given that the committee won't meet again until August, that delegation's important to keep the ball rolling and to keep our working going.
Mike, if I could, Mr Chair, just add a couple of comments on that. I think number one, the relationship with HCC is the key metro is vital, and we continue to work on building an operational relationship with Mike and now with Blair in his new role. I think in terms of the service level agreements, we will finalise those over the next week and make sure that those are circulated. There is a view here that Regional Council with its significant funding would like its own service level agreement. I think with regard to the 10 constituent councils across the region, the plan at the moment is to circulate by and large the same service level agreement we've had with councils for the last 3 years to make sure that the schedule outlines the key nature of our strategy and our work plan, and to have that in front of the committee within the next week as we move towards, I guess, funding termination at the end of this month.
Thanks. Councillor Martin.
In terms of your conversations in Wellington, what, I mean, obviously I'm being a bit delicate, what can you share with us?
Sorry. Apologies.
No, that's cool, I was, yeah. I thought there was someone else making an interjection, but that's cool. Parliament, no, sorry. Yeah, so I mean, I guess, so what I mean, obviously, we delegate to the chair, deputy chair. Obviously, through the chair, we have flexibility through strategic growth or council if we need to have a further meeting or an extra meeting of this committee. What kind of can you share us? Because I'm just trying to get a feel of, you know, the comparison between, say, Metro, Hamilton, Waikato, and certainly versus the other metros and other areas. Because obviously what I'm hearing is this is the level of operation.
Yeah, I think, look, I think if I draw a region-wide comparator, the Waikato region is investing about $4 per GDP versus a national average of about 35 into EDAs. By and large, most of the EDAs are funded through local government, through targeted rates, often through regional council leadership. The difference being most of those EDAs are well established. Some have trusts in place to provide additional funding. So the quantum of overarching funding is materially different for the Waikato. But we're also young and a new EDA, and we're not aspiring to be at national average, whereas we want to be small and focused and a facilitator that works in partnership, because our stakeholder base in this region is much greater than other regions, with 11 TAs and a whole bunch of other stakeholders involved. So at a quantum level, it's there. I think from our point of view, our baseline budget's about 1.1 this year. To deliver fully on the work program in our strategy is to the tune of about between 3.6 and 4 million. So there's a material gap there to deliver fully on a broad work program, and we're seeking some support from government to close that. That said, with 1.1 million, which is not an insignificant amount of money, there are certainly activities that can be driven and led. It's around managing expectations around what you can and can't do with a fully resourced and fully staffed agency versus a smaller entity. So we have to stick to our knitting. I'm not sure if that answers the nature of the question.
The regional forms, Waikato Plan, but regional council, you've certainly explained this, but I'm just thinking through the chair as just an ordinary humble member of this committee. What I want is a clear understanding that we have what is, all right, and what should be the ideal and the kind of benchmark. And I realise that's the work that the chair and deputy chair and Blair and you all will be doing with Te Waka.
Look, and I appreciate the question, Martin. I think, look, what is right now is an organisation that's going into the next 3 years with a baseline of about 1.1 versus a baseline traditionally of 2, so significantly less because there was a lot of one-off funding that came in. The aspiration on what we'd like to be is not massively aspirational. It's still a relatively core work program, but the what is a baseline of 1.1 million with about between 4 and 5 people, which would have to work in a very, very focused way. The aspirational growth would need funding in order to deliver that from central government at this point. And you heard some of my comments yesterday. The nature of what we'd like to be is important to be clear on and to seek funding for. But at this point, I don't believe that there's going to be strong support from Wellington.
Councillor Martin, if I can just maybe help add to Chair Hamish's comments. So Hamilton City Council's budgeted contribution is $140,000 in the new LTP. That's consistent with the contribution, $140,000 per annum in the last LTP. As Hamish has said, Regional Council has significantly upped their contribution subject to final ratification of the LTP from 1 July, from I think 300 to 750,000. So that's great, and that I think is certainly reflective of the regional council's broad mandate across the region. So the service agreement that Hamilton will be entering into is the same as we've had for the last 3 years, just updated for the things that Hamish and Mike Bennett have referred to.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Rob.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions. One, on the work plan delivery, in responding to Martin's questions, are you about 0.9 of a million short, are you, in terms of what your work plan is and the delivery cost of that versus, you know, do you really need 2 million and you've got 1.1 million? Is that the extent of the shortfall?
Look,
In rough terms,
Rob, look, in rough terms, the budget to deliver the full work programme in full is about $3 million for FY22 and between $3.7 and $3.9 million for FY23 and 24. We have committed funding at this point of 1.1. So the delta is between $1 and $2 million per annum. That said, we are still seeking to renew our business sponsorship support, which would bring in $250,000. We're working with the PDU to see whether we can seek some specific staffing support to enable areas of staffing within our business that's completely aligned to where the government is going. But yes, there's a material delta there, which absent a solution, we then have to look at the nature of what the core is and what we can deliver.
Yeah, okay. Do you work with other similar organisations? I understand there's the Committee for Auckland, and I suspect lots of other sister organisations around the country. Are you leveraging off them in terms of, you know, getting the best bang for bucks, and where there's overlaps, say within, you know, the Auckland and the H2A and so forth, where there could be some synergies that we can both spend one lot of money and get the benefits for both organisations?
Look, I'm in an ideal world that would be a pragmatic solution. I think what we do find is often that behaviour is far more territorial and competitive. And I think in terms of serving the interests of the Waikato, we're working very hard to build a closer working relationship with Priority One and Tauranga. In particular because freight logistics being probably the biggest single project that is a driver for business has a strong linkage in the partnership with the Port of Tauranga. So if I look at the bottom of the triangle, that makes a lot of sense. I was at the Economic Development Conference with a number of people, including Minister Nash last week, had strong conversations around how and where we work together. The reality is everyone is serving their own interests to some extent, but we are working with Pam Ford, who heads up ED within the Auckland business, and talking around that role. She's also chair of ED&Z. So trying to build relationships and understanding. Yep. The reality is many of them are funded at multiples of times our level of funding, and they're focused on driving the interests of Auckland or others. So I think Tauranga and Priority One is probably the closest ally. We've involved Nigel and the team around our logistics work, and that's a relationship that I think we need to build on and extend if we're to be a competitive sort of foundation to the pointy bit in Auckland.
Yep, thank you. Okay. And last question, Chair. Will the service agreement, particularly if there are some changes, will it come back to this committee or to council before we sign it off? It suggests to me in the motion that we're giving approval today to sign it off without there being any sort of straight approval. And I'm only really concerned if there are any changes that, you know, might suggest that it's appropriate to bring it back to either us or to council.
Yeah, so the delegation as presented gives the delegation to the chair, the deputy and the chief executive to finalise and execute that agreement. My understanding, Councillor Rob, is that it's largely consistent with what's been in place for the last 3 years. And of course we have, through the LTP, we have our budgeted funding there.
Yeah.
I guess that delegation, if the three members determined that there were changes was such that they felt that they needed to bring it back, that option remains. But as worded, the delegation does provide the ability to take it through and execute. But certainly, yeah, I mean, from what I've seen in the draft and the working drafts, it is consistent with what we have in place now.
Okay. I've got confidence in the chair and deputy chair that they would consider bringing it back to wherever it should go if the changes warrant council approval. So thank you for that.
Rob, the only change that we're proposing is to move the payment frequency to one of monthly as opposed to 6 monthly. That's really to protect Hamilton City as well as everyone else, to make sure that we're aligning work program with payment as we go through that 3-year period.
Okay, I don't see that as a major change though. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for your vote of confidence. Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Good morning. Just in terms of the funding, it's, of course, you know, it's not good news to understand the constraint that you're in. You talked about the majority of regional economic agencies, EDAs, being funded sort of, at least the funding facilitated by a regional government, regional lens. So where are we falling short in this? Is the regional councils providing sufficient support to work with their 11 territorial authorities to get you funded, or yeah, I mean, be honest about it. Where's the shortfall, or why is?
I think the shortfall's there for a number of reasons. I think it's there as a new EDA and a broad number of stakeholders. The expectation versus the level of funding was probably, I think, well mismatched from day one. Right. Paula, I think the nature of investment out of what I'll call the 10 councils versus the regional council is significantly below the comparative level of investment from other councils on a GDP and headcount basis.
Regional council is.
I'm talking about from a local council point of view.
Yeah.
So a lot of the other EDAs have local council and regional council involvement. They tend to be a smaller group of people. Yeah. But the level, so as an example, the Taupo area spends $600,000 on economic development in its own area, and collectively 10 councils invest $370,000 across the rest of the Waikato. So that just gives you, and I'm not trying to point fingers there, but that is also matched before Mike nudges me by, you know, councils also having their own staff and resources. So when I talk about the 4 versus 34, it might be 8 versus 34, but relatively speaking, we're very much at the bottom end of overall funding. Regional council, you know, has made a significant commitment to support it, which is fantastic. But it's from a funding support. Yeah. Look, it's fair to say that, and we're in a public forum, that the views of individual constituent councils and regional councils aren't always aligned, and people have their own views on how economic development and projects in their own areas should be managed locally and centrally, and I think that's a really interesting debate. We can't apply a broad brush across one region. I think we have sub-regions and we have components, constituents with individual agendas.
Has that changed since COVID? Is there a move back to sort of support your own greater than it was before, or?
Look, globally, we're seeing governments around the world tighten and focus internally on their own stakeholders. I think with the pressure that's coming on councils around funding, let alone the reforms with RMA and Three Waters and everything else that are there, it's quite natural that everyone's looking at their own patch to some extent and working out what it means for them, and the coffers. It's, you know, we acknowledge that it's extremely difficult for local government to extend funding in this environment when revenue's fallen. So look, we're in a bit of a catch-22 around that, and that we recognise that the government's view would be these things should be funded through local government in partnership with industry, which is, we're one of only 2 that are doing that. Our appeal to government has been, well, look, that's just not realistic in this environment for a region that should be the engine room of economic growth and recovery. And the same applies to the work we're doing across construction, and, you know, the massive issue around our ability to fund infrastructure. It's an issue that councils are facing. You know, our growth in this region is going to be massively constrained by housing availability, which fundamentally comes back to the availability of land and the ability to fund an infrastructure. And you know, councils, I'm straying a little bit, but councils simply don't have the ability to fund that level of investment. So there is a role for central government here. While they see in many ways the Waikato region as not having an issue, we have the greatest potential to make contribution.
And just following on from that, your relationship with government, how would you describe it? And is there any way that we can help through you, Chair?
Look, I think the relationship's evolving. We certainly work very hard with agencies to build relationships, and I met with the head of the PDUs last week, and I spoke to Minister Nash briefly. We've got strong engagement through Jamie and trying to build some engagement with Gaurav as well in terms of local MPs. I think building a relationship sort of with trust and mutual respect in Wellington is something that's really important. We're on the start of that journey. It's going to require, I think, two things: A, time in Wellington, and B, a joined up approach with the mayoral forum or key mayors and others to say we need to talk with strong voice in Wellington around the needs for the Waikato. That disparate thinking has always been a problem in this region. I suspect in some ways COVID and funding has exacerbated interest, and that there's never been a more important time for this region to work collaboratively and to communicate together.
One last question, because I don't want to hog it, sorry. What do you see as the greatest area of opportunity for Hamilton in this space through to Waka at the moment?
Look, the number one would have to be building off the logistics and supply chain opportunity led out of Ruakura. And that project in and of itself is significant, but it's also the platform that offers for us to attract business and industry into the Waikato. So we're seeing major distribution centres looking to relocate out of Auckland, major manufacturers looking to distribute it. The biggest issue though, and we're working with a major German company that wants to come here as well, is availability of land and the ability to build, which is coming back to infrastructure. So massive around logistics, supply chain, which feeds into manufacturing. The IT and innovation space is particularly interesting as well, because of the base that we have here coming out of the university. But that's a nascent area that we're working on. It's about building connectivity off that. But probably the biggest single area is the logistics and distribution piece.
Thank you, Chair.
Through the Chair, if I may just add a couple of comments to all of your questions and Hamish's answers. So I think it's fair to say that the Waikato region is a very big area, and the role of Te Waka and in particular the sectors that Te Waka focuses on, it's very easy for Hamilton to see a strong correlation to those key sectors. And you can look at those on page 25 onwards of the report, and in each of those sectors, 7 sectors, are very active and strong in this area. So for Hamilton and our work with Te Waka and the work that Mike Bennett's leading, there's a strong correlation. When you take that out across the entire Waikato region and 12 councils, some of the challenge in these big initiatives in the region is hard for some of those funding partners to see the return on their investment, and they struggle with that. I'm trying to think of the word, Hamish. They struggle to see the dollars and where's the direct benefit back to us. Now, the reality is the government wants to engage with the region as a region. We need to have a strong voice as a region. We need to work together and really champion those industries and opportunities together, many of which are centred in and around this area. But there are a number of those that also sit out in the wider region, but it's trying to find that correlation. So to Hamish's point, that regional funding model, and potentially over time a greater regional funding model potentially in place through such as the Regional Council, will assist with that. But it is getting that understanding of sometimes you don't see a direct benefit for the investment and economic development. It's a long-term game, it's a long-term initiative, and some of the things that Hamish and Te Waka are driving are around laying the foundations for those industries to grow and thrive over the long term.
Thank you, Blair.
Thanks. Councillor Maxine.
Thanks, Hamish, and thanks for the great work that you're doing around the region. And for that exclamation mark, Deputy Mayor. My question's with regard to the investment facilitation piece of the PO that you talk about, and particularly in regard to Hamilton City Council. You may be aware that we have re-established our endowment fund, and later today we'll be talking a little bit more about what the plans, etc., are about there. But and with regard to that, how might your knowledge, expertise and networks be leveraged on Hamilton City Council's behalf to become a part of that investment facilitation that you talk about?
Look, I think Maxine, number one is a close working relationship between the teams and a shared understanding of what's important. That connected thinking, connected engagement is absolutely vital. I think I think to Blair's comment, a lot of what we're seeing across the region what ultimately does benefit Hamilton City by building base and strengthening the industries that we have here. So I think, look, the investment work, we decided not to employ an investment specialist last year because in our mind going and doing a generic sales pitch on selling investment in the Waikato was a waste of time and money. Our view is that investment work needs to be targeted around key sectors and industries where there's specific opportunity, where we go and target. So, for example, are we targeting water-intensive industries from Auckland with major issues up there? We've got our own infrastructure issues around. So it's a targeted investment program where we see significant benefit to the Waikato region. And that's where it's aligning here with what Mike and the broader team are focusing on and making sure we're working together around opportunities that we see. So a great example is this German manufacturing business that both Mike and I have been talking to. Personally, I would like to see them in the region, and those geographic boundaries of councils at times, are an obstacle. But there's a lot of strength for the region around bringing in an organisation like here, whether they sit in Ohiniwai or at Hautapu or Ruakura. We've got to work together, and that's that joined up thinking for the benefit of ultimately the region and Hamilton at its heart. So I think it's having clear focus. I think we've adopted a focus on 4 key sectors to start. We recognise that that dairy, agri is a major industry, but there's a lot of people working in that area. There's a lot of opportunity for us also to extend into health and also into what I'll call the environmental green space around leadership. And that's where I think bringing together the base that Hamilton has with education, key corporates and money provides us with the strongest base to go and attract those types of companies. But you've got to be deliberate around the way that we're going and doing it, where we have natural attributes and a strong proposition which is different from others. So going and selling a broader, let's create a broader technology approach when everyone's doing it is perhaps not as smart as let's start off with the keys that we have around AI and some of the other areas in agri-tech. Let's start off where we have unique advantage, work in partnership to then attract the companies and that require the investment and make sure we've got an ecosystem which just connects the dots. There's a lot of stuff in the region that's invested in by people outside of the region because people in the region with money don't even know about them. So that's the key bit of work we're now looking at, is just how do we get an investment ecosystem where we have that knowledge to connect capital and opportunity locally. That's going to be centred in Metro, not in the region.
And that's not just about attracting new people into Hamilton and the Waikato, but supporting those that are
here
within the district that want to grow but are constrained by the ability to raise finance.
Absolutely, and a lot of that is not just enabling them to connect with finance, it's actually providing the support to them for them to be capital ready. So again, you used that word earlier around knowledge, is do we have a central database where we're working together on companies that we spot with opportunity, and how do we provide support to them in a collaborative way, which may be simply be introductions. It may be enabling connections to people that can provide that support to enable them to be in a position where capital is not the scarcity here, the opportunity in a channelled way is the scarcity.
Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Maxine. Any further questions? Okay, thanks, Hamish and Mike. Good. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We've got a staff recommendation. Rob, are you happy to move it?
Yes, I'll move. Yes.
I'm just happy to, Councillor Martin, given that you and I then we're not approving delegation to ourselves. Okay, so we'll go to debate. We'll start with you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I will briefly just make a couple of comments. Look, I think what I've learned today is that from Hamish's presentation is that funding constraints could hold back progress of Te Waka, given always my belief that on the face of it, service delivery is often best delivered by independent agencies rather than solely by council. I would be wanting us to look at, over the next year or so, perhaps some specific funding increases that could help Te Waka deliver their work plan, and I think we can do that as we did with Hamilton Waikato Tourism a few years ago, where we gave them a specific increase in annual funding because they came to us with specific initiatives and a new work stream that they expected they could deliver on the basis of that extra funding. I also think that having an independent agency doing this rather than council also means that we benefit from them working with other councils within the region. And my few years of experience on this council teaches us that it is often very difficult to work with our neighbouring councils and to get collective support for the initiatives that we believe, and they may also believe, are good for the region. And also with them working outside of this specific region, working with Tauranga and working with Auckland, may well deliver as we move forward even better benefits. So in terms of the work that you Chair and Deputy Chair will do on the service agreement, I would like to see perhaps some discussion and work stream around where we might be able to specifically help Waka deliver on some immediate areas of their work stream where we can see some immediate benefits flowing back to this region. And obviously the area that Hamish is focused on today is around the inland port and the work that is becoming immediate. As I read in the paper a couple of days ago, that the first commercial tenant has now been signed up for that. And my visit out to the university a couple of weeks ago suggests that the site works are proceeding very, very quickly out there. So, there may be some urgency and some immediate benefits from the group working closely with Tainui and the development of the inland port. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Councillor Martin.
It's very hard to follow that one. I totally agree, actually. It's interesting. I totally agree with the mover in terms of his identification. Consistent with our other regional contribution, whether that's H2A, Future-Proof Waikato Plan, I would say that we're in the middle of potentially huge structural reform about to happen. We've got obviously with the Waters announcement. How do we do economic development? How do we do regional economic development? And the critical thing, which was Hamish was saying about all the TAs they have to go around and keep talking to. What is the role of the regional council? What is our role? And what is the kind of input and submissions we're going to be making to the panel that's reviewing local government, all right? And the economic development bit, what does that look like, and how is that coordinated, and how is that funded? I can't really better Councillor Pascoe's analysis of where I honestly think we have to be on that issue. But I think that we need, dare I say it, whether it's this committee or whether it's strategic growth, that deep dive discussion of, in an ideal world, how will this look like in future? I agree with Rob that you want a professional, independent body as against a pressure group that does lots of good work, and you read their chairman's newsletters occasionally, or the chief executive newsletters. This one is a professional, it's got the solid, it's doing the research, and obviously we have a relationship where it's giving, value for money. But what I'm hearing, just forgive me if I'm wrong, is that the potential for this region or for this organisation is, the economic development potential could be compromised. And it's not just a matter of, extra dough, I get that, but it is a matter of some of the sort of structural reform stuff. I hope I'm trying to be as clear as possible. So I think to Blair, I think this committee and we as a council have a heap of work to do as to where we would like this ultimate to land, and obviously that does relate to everything else that is happening in the local government reform area.
Thanks, me Paula.
Just a couple of comments around the importance of having, as you say, Martin, an independent organisation to broker. We have excellent staff in our organisation who have a very good relationship with Te Waka. The focus is slightly different in each, that we add to the value to the Te Waka framework, but they reach more broadly than our staff do. So if we're going to have a truly integrated regional economy and a regional cross-boundary approach, then we do need Te Waka to thrive, in my view. And I would hate to see them, their funding diminished to the point where they just can't be effective. And what I do recall them being set up, because I had a part to play in that when I was in my previous job. And the idea was, as Hamish said, to let business and councils co-fund and to put some of the ability back in the business community. Having said that, we did go to government at that time. They were only setting up regional economic development agencies in areas that were struggling, and that was their way of lifting up, like the north, etc. And so they supported to some extent our efforts, but I do think it's now time to go back to government and say, well, we've moved on a whole heap now. The Waikato, as part of the Central North Island proposition, is strong, and that the potential is huge. So we've heard about the potential from Hamish around logistics and supply chain off the back of Ruakura. We know we've also got opportunities in the titanium hub area around the airport as well. In addition to that, there's some fantastic work that I know Chairman Ryan, you're involved in and doing a really good job around the tech sector and how we can show genuine leadership as our centre of the nation to add to the New Zealand Inc. and strengthen businesses' proposition in Hamilton. And I support that work. And I know Te Waka is supporting that work too. So I absolutely want that work to continue. I don't know what we do in terms of how we go with the funding. Certainly I'm happy alongside you, Ryan, to broker to government again about their support post-COVID and standing up strong economies, and us being one. And maybe that's a point we can infuse in my opening speech at the business forum. I do believe in joined up visits, so I think going down to Wellington with Te Waka and other key business stakeholders in the tech sector in particular is going to be useful, following that up. In the meantime, if there's staff feel there's any value in us writing or to either through the mayoral forum, doing some work through the mayoral forum, or doing some work through central government, I'd be more than happy to take some direction on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. I'll just say a few words. Really thankful for all the words that have been spoken. I think very supportive of what we're trying to achieve here, and very succinctly said. I think one thing about Te Waka is it's only 2.5 years old, and it's really, I think Hamish as a chair has done a really good job of not boiling the ocean, to use his words, and actually defining how we can move the needle in a meaningful way. And I think it's really important that they get this level of support to enable them to go to that next phase of entrenchment and development. So, as everyone else said, keen to support where we're able, and also to your point, Rob, maybe we do need to look at how we can resource them better, because it is sort of crumbs off the table, as it were, in terms of giving them meaningful support. So I look forward to that opportunity down the track, if and when required. Right of reply?
Yeah, just very briefly. Look, I wasn't intending to undermine our staff in terms of pushing further work onto Te Waka, but look, there's an opportunity that we can work together, and I think in a political environment, the independent agency often has a better steer through our other local councils within the region and outside the region than our staff would do in certain areas. So I see the synergies of both staff, good competent staff that we have got in this area, and Te Waka working together to achieve those outcomes. And my thought is not around increasing the funding in a general sense. It was around perhaps finding particular projects that we might fund on a one-off basis and trying to identify particular projects, say within the city, like the inland port, which Hamish alluded to as being priority areas that we might try and find some funding between now and the next annual plan, if that's appropriate to do so. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the vote. We'll just go show of hands. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We're up to item 8. Just before we do, what I thought I might do, Rob, because you've got to go 8:12, is after our morning tea break, we'll move into PX and talk about the MEF action plan item, because you're part of the working party, and I don't want you to miss that.
Well, I will only be away for 90 minutes at the most.
Yeah, but we're going to PX probably around lunch, and so we might have the whole session gone. But if we would do that section at 11,
yep.
At least you are part of that working group and you can speak to that.
Oh, yeah, okay, so, okay, that's fine, that's fine.
And then anything else is a bonus.
Yeah.
All right.
Around 90 minutes.
So item 8, welcome Sean and Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. I just introduced this item. This is the time of year where annually we come to you for approval for our recommendations for the deployment of the Event Sponsorship Fund for the next financial year. You'll recall that last year a number of approvals were made for our event sponsorship of different events over a 3-year period, and as a result of that, the bulk of the fund has already been pre-committed, so we only have a small amount of funding left to be deployed in this financial year, hence the small number of actual events that are being put in front of you for consideration. Jenny is here because she manages the fund and she manages the relationship with all the people that we deal with, and will have more accurate answers than I will on any questions you may have. The key thing to note, if I may, the Centenary Malulu Parade and Legends game, it's the 100-year anniversary for the Waikato Rugby Union. It's a small amount, but I would like you to also be aware that with my H3 hat on, we're actually providing them a lot of in-kind support as well, including some technical support, and a couple of our staff members who are event management experts are providing their services as well. So they do need cash though. This is their biggest challenge, is cash. It's not a lot of money, but I do want you to know that we are doing what we can in an in-kind sense. So really without that, I'll just be happy to, or Jenny will be happy to take any questions you may have.
Councillor Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just one question, and that's around the proposed funding for Tainui Waka Tourism Incorporated. Are you happy with your research that there is a clear separation between Tainui Waka Tourism Incorporated, which is an incorporated society, and Aotearoa Experience Limited, which is a limited liability company? I note in reading the report that the same people are involved in both, and reading the accounts of the incorporated society, pretty much all of the payments from one went to the other. So, you know, and I know that this funding is for not-for-profit organisations.
Yeah, look, it's a very common structure that we have with a lot of the major events that are funded around the country, whereby the event itself might be owned and controlled by a charitable trust or whatever format, but they in turn contract the services of another organisation to do it. And so you're quite right, there is that double layer. We're sort of comfortable because we're used to it and we have dealt with these people before, but it is certainly a mechanism that's pretty common. I wouldn't suggest at all that this is that particular event, or any of the events that we do, are actually necessarily commercially viable, but they do deploy services of other people to assist them.
And we approved this last year, but the event didn't go ahead. Am I right in my reading of the report that they didn't get that money in the previous year? Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Mine was a simple follow-up question to that. If these recipients aren't able to achieve their event, they don't get the money, right?
Yeah, correct.
Correct. Yeah, so that's a safety net for things falling through. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Just tied to mate, obviously we have the delegation, the community committee has the terms of reference. How does that exactly work again? I'm not going to go into which groups made the cut or didn't. This is a public session. I just want to get the dialogue that you've had with the chair and deputy of that committee.
Do you want me to explain? Okay. So there's a statement in the community committee's terms of reference that committee will provide input into the management recommendations for the disbursement of the fund. So the process is that staff communicate with the chair and deputy chair of the community fund with our recommendations for their initial feedback. We did that this year purely because of the limited number of applications. We could do that via an email and telephone conversation. In previous years, we've had face-to-face meetings. So that took place, I think the date's in the report.
You've got the date,
yeah. And yeah, they, Councillor Bunting and Councillor Kirsch provided some feedback. They agreed with the management recommendations.
So they're happy,
yes.
So in terms of their brief,
yes,
they're happy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I take that as their input being provided.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Great. If there are no further questions, we'll go to the staff recommendation. Would you like to move it, Mayor Paula? We have a seconder. Thanks, Councillor Young. Okay, we're into debate. No debate, Mayor Paula? None from you. Those in favour? Martin, you voting?
Debate ever now?
I think it does. Well done. You said you like voting for things, Martin, so I gave you the opportunity.
My good friend, you would.
All right, thanks, Sean and Jenny. It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10. Claire, if she's... Are you carrying it, Sean?
I'll move to get it on the table.
Great. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Taylor. I'll take it as read.
I think it's a very simple matter.
Correct, yep.
Are there any questions? Maxine?
We're on 9, are we?
10.
Item.
One question. Is this one of these areas that will get sorted out when we update the delegations? As I understand, it's come here because it's for 10 years, or is that?
Look, I probably need to, it's a title of the delegations.
Yeah, look, it's a part of a commercial rental arrangement that comes through to this committee, and yes, it's not hugely significant other than the time frame, and so with that, it needs to come.
I thought we were doing some work at the moment. Tracy might know. We're doing some work on updating the delegations, and is this one of those ones that could change? That there's no need for a report going forward.
Yes, so we are bringing a paper to the next council meeting specifically on parts of the delegation, one of them being timeframes of certain contracts that we have. So if that paper goes through, obviously that'll pick up these sorts of things.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any against? No, carried unanimously. Item, are we 11? We're about to order here. Policy review. Tracy. So we're on page 248.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to remind committee that we did bring this paper to you at the last committee, but we went away and had some more discussion with the Chair and the Deputy Chair around how we wanted to format this particular policy. So there were just a couple of things that I would like to bring to your attention. So this policy is really including, we put some more wording around diversity and what that would look like with the CCO appointment process. Very much emphasising the collaborative process that we want this committee to do with the stakeholders of each of our CCOs, acknowledging that CCOs have their own constitution. We've also tried to make it a little bit simpler in the policy itself by putting in the majority shareholdings that we have with CCOs and minority, and separating those two things out. And the other piece that we talked about at the last committee was around boards and remuneration specifically. So again, we've tried to work with the chair and deputy chair on trying to find some words around this, and what we ended up falling on was reviewing that once a triennium. So if, happy to take the report as read and to take any questions.
Just before we do, Councillor Ewan, did you want to just add anything to this?
No, other than I'm happy to move it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions about any of those changes? Just to reiterate what Tracy was saying, the big one around the trigger points around the shareholding was so that as a council we don't get too carried away trying to influence directors when we've got a less than 10% shareholding. And also, as Councillor Ewan brought up last time, that each term we get an input as to the band around the remuneration, so that we've got with those that we have a majority shareholding of. So it just provides us that touch point. Okay, is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor Taylor, go to debate. Councillor Martin.
No, look, it's fine. The work's been done, and obviously I'm very happy that the fundamental principle that the full board, i.e. the council in this case, ultimately is the final arbiter and has final accountability for any appointments we make. Obviously 95% of the work will be done, one, by the appointment process and by the relevant committee, but the check and the balance is always the full council, and also it means that everyone is accountable for any appointments we make. And I certainly know this very well on another body I used to serve on, should an appointment go wrong.
Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, look, I'll be very brief. I'm having, with Councillor Ryan, spent some time on this document, feel really comfortable. The critical points for me was in regards to board member remuneration, that it reflected a public service element, so that when fees were appointed, there was a public element focus or lens put over what they would get in terms of any remuneration, and that gives me considerable comfort, where in the past I'd been a little concerned. There's still enough commercial tension, so we're still paying people for doing what they need to do, but with a public service lens.
Cool. Any further debate? Maxine.
Just a very small point, and I don't probably need the whole 3 minutes, I think, just to acknowledge the modern thinking around diversity on boards, and that this isn't just a Hamilton City Council or our CCOs or other organisations that we're involved with, but this is happening in a much wider perspective, to be able to see good women and other diversity moved into areas of decision making around boards and other in our society. So acknowledge that there is a real desire for Hamilton City Council to be able to see this new way of working and promoting women into these roles. So thank you.
You've inspired me, Paula. She's back on.
Oh yeah, no, my comment is just going to be slightly different to that. In terms of remuneration of these boards, we've got to remember that we want to attract really good, high quality people to do the work for us, and you have to be relative to the market to be able to do that, because otherwise they'd rather go on the potato board of New Zealand than on an important board for council, because they'll get more coin for it. And I think that would be unfortunate, because we've actually got to make this work attractive for a range of directors who usually hold more than one directorship. And so board members need to find this attractive, is what I was saying. Was I in debate, or was it? Good. Oh yeah, good. There you go. Oh, no. When I was on the IOD, one time they ran an ad, they were looking for board members on the potato board of New Zealand, and I thought, no offence to anybody on it, I couldn't think of anything worse. But
Potato. Okay, we're going to go to the
Underground movement.
those in favour. Carried unanimously. Blair was just going to comment there.
Not on the potato board, but councillors, with that decision, I will work with Tracy to get a letter that the chair can then send out to the respective CCOs to advise them of this change, but also to advise the relevant other shareholders of those particular entities. I'm just thinking in the case of the airport and LES. So it's important that both the entities and our corresponding shareholder understand that we've made these changes, and just to highlight some of those big changes so they are aware of it in their thinking and planning. Correct.
Okay, item 9 is Sean back talking about good process.
Thank you, Chair. This paper really is a hopefully self-explanatory. It is intended to inform the committee that we're in the process as scheduled for the recruitment of a new director for the Waikato Regional Airport Board, with the the departure of one of the directors who has completed 2 of their terms, and that's scheduled for the AGM that will be held in November this year. So we're embarking on the process now. We're one shareholder of 5, and we're working on a joined up process which is pretty standard to what we've done over recent years, doing an independent search and evaluation that will then come back to this committee with a recommendation for Hamilton City's Council's vote as to whether or not for the correct candidate to be put up onto the board. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, moved by Mayor Paula. I'm happy to second. Got. Did you want to start debate, Paula? Sorry, we're in debate now, Maxine. But you can debate. You can say it in debate. Did you? Oh, apologies. Away you go then.
It's just with regard to the timing. We've recently done a search, as I recall, and the report talks about November last year. That's correct, is it? Sean?
Yeah, the appointment was made in November last year. The search itself was around this time last year.
Okay. And in your view and the board's view, that that time frame is too long to be able to look back at those
the previous
applicants that might have missed out at that time that may in fact be suitable for this one?
We have actually had that conversation, and at the time that we did the last search, when we were looking for 2 candidates, we interviewed quite a number of people, and in actual fact the 2 candidates that we recommended were total standouts, and we wouldn't have actually recommended any of the other shortlisted interviews. And I think I might have said that at the time when we reported back, that whilst they're pretty high calibre people that were put on that shortlist, we didn't feel that there was quite the right fit there. And had the 2 people that we put forward not actually been on that shortlist, or if there'd only been one, we would have only put one forward and we would have started again. So we have had that discussion again just to validate exactly your question. So it will be a new search.
Yeah, thank you. Satisfies me.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. You're perched, Councillor Martin.
and we're going to listen.
No, look, I think the process, I'm just reflecting on a bit of history here. I think this process is obviously better. It's skill-based. It'll be obviously, and with skill, of course, you have different lenses around a board, which obviously means diversity, because there's a lens that people with different experience, be it gender, rate, whatever, bring, but that's important. And we've moved way beyond what I call the Dukes of Hazzard County, where the good old boys said, oh, that person would be good to have as a director, or let's just have a bit of a caucus and have a chit-chat. So the days of the good old boys, I'll choose my words very carefully, thinking it's a good idea for this person. This is professional, it's evidence-based, it's obviously protecting our investment, quite apart from the issues that we have with perhaps the shareholding agreement. So I'm quite happy with the way this process now, and I totally respect, obviously, as a result of this process, the calibre and the rigour with which we appoint people onto this board, which is also a not insignificant investment, both financially and strategically, for our city.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Is that everybody? It's been moved and seconded by myself. Those in favour? Great, carried unanimously. We've got 2 items left. We're on track to do it before our morning tea break. So I'm in your hands. We've got Sean on H3. Then we can come back straight into PX.
Thank you, Chair. I have a lot I'd love to talk to you about with H3, because we've had such a busy quarter, and we've also had an incredibly busy start to the quarter that we're currently in. For the reporting quarter, which is June through March, we've had over 260 events. We've had 112,000 people through our doors. It's been an incredibly busy period for us. We still are finding that we are missing, following the COVID effect, some of the large conferences, which has been a concern to us. We love having big conferences. They bring a lot of business to the city, but they also bring additional yield that perhaps some of the smaller events don't bring. So we are sort of missing that a bit. The other, so the upside is that we've been incredibly busy, a lot of events. One of my staff members sent me a message at 4 o'clock this morning, and which was a career inhibiting move on his part, but he was quite excited about the fact that we've just been registered as the Claudelands Oval as the number 4 Australia New Zealand venue over the last 18 months, and because of the amount of activity we've been able to get on there, and you'll recall that was a sort of a bit of a strategy of ours to activate that oval. And in actual fact, the Claudelands Arena across New Zealand, Australia has ranked number 19, which might sound a bit low down the rank, but if you think about the numbers of arenas right across New Zealand, Australia, and that's a pretty good result. So it's pretty cool, but we'll have a chat with them all the same. Well, it tipped the scales, absolutely, without a doubt. So, the upside is, look, it's all good. The downside is that we've got a lot of challenge with our staffing, and you hear a lot around New Zealand at the moment about shortage of staff in a number of sectors, and we are absolutely facing that to a point where it's a little bit critical, and we're having to work pretty hard on how we overcome that. And I've got a slide I want to show you shortly about that. The other thing I'd want to bring to your attention is that in the budgets you'll see our maintenance budget, we're blowing that out a bit. That is a mix of both the budget that we did as a post-COVID expectation, where we thought our maintenance activity would drop as a result of less activity, but that hasn't occurred, so our maintenance has to be up a bit. Plus we are finding that maintenance costs are generally increasing quite significantly with materials and labour costs and that. So we have some challenges. So whilst we're very happy with our revenue, we want you to be aware that we're very we remain cautious about our costs. We still have a serious issue with hotel accommodation. We have continued to lose some business as a result of a lack of commercial accommodation. And we've even noticed some of the conference organisers who have been coming have reported back to us that as a result of the tight accommodation situation, that in actual fact they're losing delegates to the conference. So we recently had a conference of around 180 people. Normally they would have had around 220, 230, and they could specifically cite where they probably lost 30, 40 or 300 or 400 people just because of a lack of accommodation. Coming up with the agricultural field days, for example, I don't know, some of you may have heard this, but Airbnb, or people prepared to rent out their houses, have just gone through the roof. The number of houses in Cambridge alone that have been rented out for field days is phenomenal. We're going to have around 140 motorhomes on site on the Claudelands Oval to assist field days with accommodation, and every day there's a few more bookings coming in. So we're doing our best to help that particular event as well. We had in the quarter just gone that we're in right now, that's not the reporting quarter, the Foodstuffs Expo that some of you will have heard about. It was over 6 days on site. They used every single square inch of Claudelands, 5,000 plus attendees, 300 exhibitors, over 2,000 room nights generated, and it was an event that was pretty major for us, for the city. There were traffic jams around the venue. It was a private event. It's not a publicly ticketed event. The organisation, Foodstuffs, that ran it, I would hate to think what their total budget and their total spend was, way beyond what they spent with us in their venue. But it was quite exciting for us, and it brought home to us the value of the Claudelands design build. The fact that we have that venue with major exhibition space, major conferencing space, big arena space, all on one site with great parking and everything else, it really sets us apart. And I can't state this enough, and I might have said this before, but whoever did the bloody design did a really good job in terms of enabling us to do that, and we should be proud. It might not be flash like some of the new conference centres coming out, but boy is it functional. And that is the feedback we're getting from so many of our clients. So for those people who did it, well done. There's a couple of slides I'd like to show, if I may, relating to food stuff. And this is, I hope you don't mind, I'm bragging here. It's a bit hard to tell on there, but because the event took up all of the floor space right across the facility, including the arena, so the lower part of that photo is actually looking down into the arena by where the retractable chairs go. And then the lower walkway just beneath where the Claudelands word is, that's the walkway you get to when you go up onto the concourse and go out to the seats. Because every other space was taken up and they wanted to have a dinner, sit-down dinner for 750 people, followed by a formal awards ceremony, they needed a stage space. So after dinner in the concourse, which was served out there, they went into the upper part of the arena seating that you'll see there, and where those screens are falling down, and it is a bit hard on this because it's a bit distant, we actually hung a floating stage. So all the presentations and everything else in the awards ceremonies and the videos and that were done from a stage that hung from the ceiling, and we had a walkway that went straight across from that flat concourse area, which and it's a testimony to our team who came up with that solution for the client. It's pretty cool. There's another slide there for you that might show it a bit more clearly so that you can see the presenter. So it's sort of showing it from behind, but very successful. And I really want to congratulate the team for coming up with that innovation to try and make it work for the client, and the client was certainly very, very impressed. And so just something a little bit different. The other shot that I just want to show you, and it's not clear for you, it's really an illustration, is we have, and it speaks to what I talked about, our staffing issue at the moment with the intense pressure and busyness we've got. We have some very clear rules and guidelines for hours of work for our staff. You know, the number of days in a row, the number of hours in a day, the breaks that are required, the breaks that are required between days, and so forth. And this is our mantra that we try to adhere to look after our staff. in terms of their well-being and make sure that tiredness doesn't become a critical factor. The last 2 months we have broken our rules because of the sheer volume. And the next 2 months we have the same again. We have no, we were very disappointed to hear the rugby's been cancelled for this weekend, the Super Rugby, because of COVID. But some of our staff, it'll be their first weekend off in 7 or 8 weekends. And so I'm just alerting you to that. We are struggling we've had a few staff leave for different opportunities elsewhere. But we are really struggling to find staff, and we are really struggling to get casual staff. We used to be able to rely on a big casual pool for our heavy lift teams that sort of set up the tables and the trestles, the tech services team who do all the rigging, the lights and sound, and getting casual staff is harder and harder and harder. So you are going to see that we will be employing more fixed staff, fixed term staff, or permanent staff, because we can't keep going the way we're going and putting ourselves at a little bit of jeopardy on the staffing issue. The team's been fantastic. They've all rallied. They're doing what they want to do because the show's got to go ahead, but we are at that point where we, because of the challenge with the forward booking and the availability of lack of availability of casual staff, we are going to bite the bullet and employ more people, which we haven't done for quite a while. And I just want to signal that to you. We will be doing it within our budgets. Obviously, our revenues are going up to help compensate for that, and a lot of our staff are charged back to the client in any case. But it's just an awareness for you. Great problem to have, but we're treating it as a pretty serious problem. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sean. Very, very compelling report. Mayor Paula.
Thanks, Sean. As always, a really good, thorough report, easy to understand too. Just in terms of the hotel, you'll have seen some recent efforts around that space again, and I know there are some, I know you can't breach any commercial confidentialities, but there are some favourable conversations underway.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so we should have some good heart that maybe in the next 6 months we'll be able to see some announcements around.
I'm very hopeful that we will.
With one of those opportunities, because I know there's many.
There's a few opportunities around. To be honest, it's probably the busiest I've ever seen it in terms of inquiry from major hotel operators and investors that I've seen for a number of years. And there's no doubt about the fact that I think we will see some things happening. Some will be smaller in scale, and there's one or two that might be reasonably sizable. And to be honest, most of my day tomorrow in Auckland actually is meeting with some interested parties on that. One story I will tell you about dealing with a major hotel chain that we had a discussion with, and we have shared as Clawlands or H3 all of our numbers, our booking profiles, past and forward, to give them an idea. They came back to us and said that they double-checked with their conference and functions managers in their other hotels around the country, and they said, is this true about Hamilton and Clawlands? And they all came back and said yes. They said there is a lot going on there, and so that it was quite good that their own teams and their own hotels were validating what they're hearing about the amount of business that we're currently enjoying in Hamilton. So that was a really quite positive to get that from internally. And that. So I was quite chuffed to sort of get that feedback. So yes, there is a lot of energy at the moment, definitely.
Yeah. But in real terms, even if somebody in the next 3 months nails their proposal down, it's going to take 18 more months to build a hotel.
Correct. There is one project that is underway that is moving now. And I guess the only thing I would say is that what we need to do as council, and this is a broader picture if you talk about economic development and our role through our economic development agenda, is I would just ask that let's make sure that those people that do want to come to town, we make them welcome and we make their communication and time with us on the regulatory side and everything else, make it a pleasant experience and not a roadblock experience. And I think that would be a message I would have, and I actually need to talk to Blair about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say through you, Blair and Ryan, how do we get that cracking? Because we've identified that some time ago. So what are staff working on that now about how we get out of the way so that a hotel can get seamlessly It's a win-win, isn't it?
Yeah. I need to have a conversation with Blair. We haven't had a chance to join up on that.
Yeah, sorry, I know you sort of knew in that particular chair, Blair. So, yeah, thank you.
Cool, Councillor Rob.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Sean, for your report. I find it's getting more and more detailed each time, and it's very, very easy to read too. Just on indirect overhead costs, I notice that we have quite significant variations between what's budgeted and what's actually being charged. And I know I've asked this question before about how it's actually put together, and I recall that you don't have a lot of say in terms of what actually ends up as the charges there. But do we need to be a little bit more careful on finance costs and...
So what page are you on, Rob?
Oh, sorry, I'm on page 277, which is the financial summary, item 2. Do we need to be a little bit more careful around how we do our budget in terms of where... I know finance costs will have come down, but we're about a third less after 3 quarters than we had originally budgeted for at the beginning of the year. And also depreciation and amortization also seems quite out of kilter.
I'd need to defer to Tracy on that. As you know,
So I had one eye on Tracy when I was asking the question.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, for our team, we really focus on our direct operating line.
I know that. I know
not the
that.
indirect,
Yep.
for very obvious reasons. So Tracy needs to.
But unfortunately, the indirect costs or overhead costs are quite significant at around $10 million a year.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So just in regards to specifically depreciation amortization, so obviously that correlates to the capital projects that had been budgeted or thought they were going to do. So a lot of that just depends on timing of start dates of when we were doing the original budgets and annual plans and long-term plan last time, what we were anticipating those to be. So that's that one. The finance cost is a direct, you'll see this across, and you'll see this at the Finance Committee report in a couple of weeks' time. So obviously that's, again, a direct correlation between what we're borrowing and then what we're paying for our finance costs. So because we're borrowing a lot less this year, it means the finance cost to council overall is a lot less. And what we do in that specific case is we obviously give that out to the parts of the business. So what you're seeing now is the portion of that coming through to H3. So that covers that.
So are we behind then in terms of our capital program in the H3 facilities? And given that the depreciation is significantly less.
If you go to the, I'm just looking for the page number, page 288, it has our capital spend for the year.
Okay.
And our projection for year end. So
I can have a look at
yes,
that.
it's a little bit. It's a little bit behind, but it'll catch up, which is a usual pattern you see for us. Yep. Okay.
And my last question is just to respond, Sean, to your comments about recruiting and retaining professional staff. I'm aware, and I've only had this third hand, that one of your employees recently resigned with the prospect of a job in Auckland, which was 50% more than what we were paying here. Are we meeting the market in terms of the professional personnel costs, or is the market so small that the demand is greater than the supply?
It's a challenging question in open session, but the example you're talking about, yes, I'm aware of that, and I've got 2 others as well that are similar. And so we have been finding that I don't think we don't meet the market now, but we do have a number of examples where people are being cherry-picked out with very, very attractive offers, without a doubt.
So is that a supply and demand problem, or are we... I mean, what I'm trying to see is whether we're meeting the market.
Well, look, a bit of both.
Bit of both.
Bit of both.
Thank you. I appreciate the sensitivity around it. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Not for me to interfere with operations. One hopes that at the 4 a.m. phone call or text or whatever will be met with a degree of compassion. I'll leave it at that. I was just really fascinated with, obviously in terms of the venues, and obviously this affects all of the three, H3, with the number of motels and hotels that are in part because of COVID and obviously because of the housing crisis, are essentially out of action for accommodation.
Correct.
You then sort of talked about Airbnb and other. Can you just give us maybe anecdotal of how that bit's working? The field days will be a really good observation point, obviously, in terms of how alternative accommodation types come through.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, people find a way, and there's any number online, through the websites, that people can go to and source it, and certainly. What we're hearing is that people they know when there are pressure points, and so they're saying, hey, we'll move out of the house for a week. And so that's becoming quite common. You'll recall a number of the presentations that Jason Dawson's done, where he's shown you the Airbnb stats, for example, and the explosion of it. If you look at we were voted the #1 destination for Book a Batch, I think, a wee while ago. And if you look at the schedule, the dates and that, it was all wrapped around our major events like the Sevens and everything else where there's pressure on. The social housing issue is pretty serious for us because it has taken out a lot of inventory, and that has caused not just a loss of business, but a lot of people that are coming to our events or conferences to actually stay somewhere else or actually make us a quick trip from Auckland and not stay over, which they might have normally done. And so I guess what I would suggest is we're losing the economic value add of what we're all about and what we are doing as a result. My bigger concern with the loss of motel inventory through the social housing, however, is how many of those properties, once their contracts with government are over and the pressure's over, and whenever that will be, it could be a long time, I suspect, how many of those will actually return as motels, as commercial accommodation? Will they then be redeveloped for other purposes and everything else? So I'm sort of a bit more concerned about what's the renewal going to be for that inventory that we've lost at the moment.
And obviously, as you would hear from me, don't misperceive my question, because obviously there's no debate about whether someone sleeps in a car or a motel unit, but ideally we want to, as a society, achieve a better outcome. But, the stadium, I call it. Yeah. That suddenly, because I've just, I've had the default, that's great, there's all those motels around there. Now, that doesn't sort of happen anymore.
No.
So, trend line is, as you say, it's either the day visits going back up the express, or is it elsewhere, or is it Airbnb?
Airbnb, or we've had some conferences where, or events where the major teams and entourages have stayed in Rotorua or Tauranga, or South Auckland, and where there is a fair amount of accommodation. So people are going to different lanes. So as I say, we're losing the economic value add that we've been working hard to achieve.
I'm just wondering through the chair, and it's not my obviously speciality, but it's a conversation to be had, even predicting, because obviously even if we move to a next stage, whether the developer says, you know what, I think this is a better investment for me to put this into central city, high density, apartments, accommodation, as against going back and running it as a motel.
Right.
That's really, and it would be really interesting to sort of kind of do a bit of a predictor about that accommodation stuff.
Yeah, and that's my personal theory of what is going to happen.
Yeah, and it's because we obviously have a series, people make decisions.
Yeah.
The other thing, and to a degree you touch on it, probably in another agenda item, I'll leave it at that, because that's, I would obviously in pink like an appropriate chat around the hotel, the interest up at the appropriate time through this committee, because that's interesting. I realise what you say now is, of course, extremely limited. With the sort of, I'll ask it here, with Claudelands and, its linkage, to the CBD, and there was that prospect of O'Neill Street, better link. Remember, years ago then, I think a submitter came and there was chat, and then suddenly it disappeared from the, disappeared just like that from the LTP. And I'm just wondering where we have the conversation again, around the strategic, you know, you have this major venue, all right, we've got the issue of accommodation on one side, but how that better integrates with our CBD area?
Well, and under the existing district plan, there's provision for a walkway, a much more designated walkway along O'Neill Street through Sonning Car Park site and over the bridge. That's never been activated, and I guess my understanding, and also from my previous involvement with property for council, was that an ultimate development of the Sonning Car Park would act as a trigger to that development of a proper pedestrian way and everything else for Claudelands. Council's Transport Department are putting in pedestrian crossing, lights pedestrian crossing at the Sonning Car Park, which is a really, really good thing to be happening because of the amount of pedestrian traffic that's going through that way. But there is work to be done without a doubt on that.
I'm just wondering if that should be an objective for us. I mean, obviously it ties into our CBD Central Hamilton activation, and I know things have to make a cut in a future AP or LTP, but I'm just wondering in terms of, I guess the overview, how does H3, the three facilities, integrate with the CBD, integrate potentially, hope for the central city train, bus station, etc., etc. And I'm just wondering if and whether Blair, you know, what I'm wanting to know is what is the trigger for us to have a combo about that?
There are some items in PX which probably tinker around the same question. We might have a bit more freedom to explore.
Okay,
Is that all right?
Fine. If I could just add to it, I mean, Claudelands is within really comfortable walking distance of the CBD. It's not the distance that's an issue. It's actually the nature of the access and how you walk there, and do you get onto the right side of the bridge, you know, at the outset and things like that. But the distance from the CBD really is not an issue. It's because it is a comfortable walking distance. It's not too bad.
I'm certainly aware of the PX issue item, but okay, if we perhaps have a further, because what I would like to see, Chair, at some stage is some kind of outcome, because I think you raise in your report a very significant issue for us, and I think all I'm saying is I'm looking for us to improve that link. Thank you.
I hear you. Moved by Mayor Paula, seconded by Councillor Ewan. Is there any debate?
Sorry, yes, there is. Thank you again, Sean and your team, for the excellent reports you do. And I have to just give a public shout out for your team down at Claudelands, because they are just absolutely brilliant at what they do, Sean. And I see them there at the many events that I'm privileged to attend. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in Claudelands that you don't see. If you've seen some of the shows lately, variety of different shows, and charity dinners and other things, the way that the backdrop and the sets and the lighting change, we are probably one of the best in the country at that. I've seen things, never seen things better. I've seen things similar. I've never seen a better standard of presentation for our events than we get in Claudelands, and also at the stadium in a different way. But Claudelands is proving to be one of the most versatile arenas and conference events in the entire country. Which brings me on to my next point, and that's your professionality of your team, Sean, as well, that adds the value. Which brings me to my main point, which is about the hotel. I'm really delighted that there are some potential developers and hotel chains in the back of this conversation, and that they're trying to hone in on an opportunity, because we've talked about it for years and years and years and years and years and years. And I actually support Sean's comment around finding ways that we can streamline when we do get a viable economic opportunity for a hotel, how we streamline that to get it in place as soon as possible. Because I wrote to the Minister about the COVID situation alongside Jason. The letter was received by the Minister, who's yet to reply with his position, but he did send the Chief, Brigadier Bliss, from the military to come and talk to me about what they're doing in the Hamilton situation. And of course, they're doing a an amazing job on behalf of our community, keeping people safe in Hamilton, no doubt about it. We are going to have workers who are coming in to do seasonal work. But what I was interested in is when we can see down the horizon, when will some of those hotels, or one of those hotels, become liberated? Can they use other facilities like L3 for some of their requirements? Because we do hurt from having this. We're not a centre like Queenstown or Rotorua, which are hurting because of lack of tourism, but do have a good stock of rooms. We don't. And then the other issue, final issue, I'm going to have 10 seconds to say it, goodness, is the emergency housing issue and how this impacts. One of my concerns, I think you raised it with me, Sean, I thought it was an excellent consideration, is that until we get a grip with our affordable housing and our social housing, emergency housing remains in our motels. The trouble with that is those motels are being less well maintained because they're lived in permanently. And when will we see them come back onto the stock of accommodation, and will they be in a fit condition for that at that point in time is a concern. So I've made those views known to government, and I'll keep lobbying alongside Jason for the right time to liberate rooms in Hamilton, to let us do what we do fantastically well, which is run events and conferences. Thank you. Sorry, I'm 39 over now.
Thanks, Sean. Look, congratulations on the 4th oval placement and the 19th arena. I think if you could get pink into Hamilton, that would boost your ratings also. I'll leave it there. We'll go, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I'll certainly try not to speak as long as I wish of the Mayor. I'll try and be, brief and concise. No, it's all cool. Hey, look, I certainly agree and acknowledge the discussion around the accommodation, but both in terms of COVID as a nation and social housing. Of course, we have to do our bit as a community, but obviously it would be, I think what the Mayor correctly does say is a bit of a lens strategically as things evolve. At what point does a hotel become available for normal, accommodation, and at what points might, with addressing with the social housing issue and the government initiatives, the work that's been done with Lale and the regional housing initiatives, at what point do motels become available again? But you do raise a very good point, as Sean has also, does the investor says, well, gee whiz, do I carry on giving a lease to a motel to this property, now it's no longer being used, or do I literally redevelop it and it moves into some of the inner city apartments? I do think at some stage you and are probably doing this, be good to have a bit of a round table around, what the accommodation looks like. And also, I just want to join with the Mayor in obviously expressing my deep admiration for the incredible professionals of our teams that do all of the H3 stuff. I mean, I know you get tons of the questions, but, just as a consumer, a layperson, just walking around and parking a car, whatever, walking through the doors, not me as a councillor, but me as an ordinary citizen, it's pretty good, and I hope that is conveyed. And obviously, I think, as Sean has alluded to, I won't go over time, as Sean has alluded to, some of the market movements, that we are in a competitive in terms of some of the employment wage rates, etc., compared with some other, particularly with the nearby metro up the road. Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Those. Very good. I shouldn't have assumed. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. We're just going to go to our last item and then we'll have a 15-20 minute break. Item 13, page 281.
Thanks. Briefly, just wanted to introduce Sija. You'll probably start seeing a bit more of her. I thought it was a good opportunity while you're here, just to put a face to the name. You'll see a lot of responses to questions you have from me. A lot of times that's just me sending you the work that Sija's done. So I just thought it was a good opportunity to just introduce her. She completed a master's here last year, and we actually poached her from the IS team, and she's been on our team now little more than 2 months. So just wanted to introduce Sija. I promised I wouldn't make her speak, but if you want to say anything. No. So to that end, just touching on the GM report, I think the primary thing we wanted to convey was that what's contained in this report gives a bit of a summary of one of the sectors that we're focusing on or have focused on since your last meeting. Mayor Paula alluded to it earlier. Chair Ryan, I know you were in attendance as well. I think the momentum around that particular sector is why it elevated itself and why there's been so much work done there. But I think it was a good representation of what can be done when council steps in, enables, and champions something and just sort of assembles all of these seemingly disparate people who are really focused on growing a particular industry, but need just sort of that coordination and encouragement. And I left there really encouraged with the next steps and the momentum and the activity in that particular sector. We're looking to do the same along logistics, as was mentioned by Waka. Huge opportunities there. Same thing in the agri-tech space as well, in our partnership with Innovation Park, and really seeing that particular asset, which is a differentiator for us, seeing that thrive. So again, this update's focused on that tech sector work, but note that there is more or less the mirror image of that going on in key other sectors. And with that, any questions, happy to take.
Just also, colleagues, there's been a lot of changeover, obviously, with Blair and Jen and Mike. There'll be a bit more visibility as to the economic development agenda stuff that's been sort of working on behind the scenes, but hasn't been really made too visible today through this report, eh? So that'll be coming.
That's correct, and I'm going to be working with Mike and Greg Carsten just around how we can align our focus and efforts and priorities around those key sectors and key economic development agenda. So we'll obviously have more to report back on that.
Okay, are there any other questions? So proud of yourself, Mayor Paul. All right, I'll move, seconded by Councillor Ewan. I've got no discussion at this stage. Cool, those in favour?
Just a very quick comment. Thank you for the really good reports. They're very easy to digest and see progress, and it's lovely to meet you. Love the tech sector work. Congratulations, Ryan, Mike, and the people that you've brought together in that space. It's an exciting step forward to claiming our place in New Zealand Inc.'s economy as we grow forward. So thank you. That's it.
Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thanks, Mike, and welcome, Sija. Just before you go, Ewan, we'll just vote to move into publicly excluded, so we come back in PX. Those in favour? Cool. Carried unanimously. Thank you. So we'll come back at, say, 35 past, and we'll go straight into item C5.